European varieties of Vitis vinifera are crossed with mostly American species. And the goal is to reach the best possible balance between natural resistance to fungi and enological quality. The resistance is brought by the America DNA, and the winemaking quality is obtained from preserving the most part of European DNA in this crossing. These are essentially PIWI.
Welcome to another episode of the Italian Wine Podcast, the Next Generation series, where we aim to answer one simple question. What are the new generations up to when it comes to wine and food? My name is Karla Ravagnolo. Join me as we dive into the latest trends in Italian wine. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Italian Wine Podcast. My name is Karla. I'll be your host for this episode of the Next Generation series. Today, I want to look at a topic that many have touched on, but just a few people have really discussed in detail. I'm talking about PIWI, which is not PIWI. Our guest will let you know why, but it's PIWI, the right pronunciation. So here today with us, we have Michele Griggio, head sommelier at Ca Apollonio, a recently born project that focuses on PIWI wines. Although its recent start, both the winery and the restaurant have been gaining international recognition. So my goal for today, for this episode in particular, is to understand what PIWI is and what we should be looking forward to. So welcome, Michele.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be hosted here today.
Thank you for joining us, actually. So right off, why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your background, your experience?
So I started my wine journey fundamentally helping in the family business. That was a wine shop with a fascinating selection of wines and food products. There, I began realizing how much study and dedication this world required to be able to meet the expectation of guests and clients. And after some experiences in Germany, mostly with the idea of learning new language and a new culture, I started working in hospitality industry, being immediately attracted to the wine service. After completing the AIS free level qualification and after participating to the ALMA-AIS Master in Wine Communication and Marketing, I worked for some years in wine retail and distribution business. During the work done for the final paper of my master, I met and embraced the Ca Apollonio project. And since 2022, I'm on the team as sommelier, helping at the same time to plan and organize the everyday front of the house tasks together with owners and executive chef.
Nice. So you mentioned actually that Ca Apollonio was started in 2022, right? So what is Ca Apollonio? Why did it start? Where is it actually? Because we haven't mentioned this yet.
I like thinking Ca Apollonio as an organism held together by the deep vision and understanding of Maria Piaviaro and Massimo Vallotto, the owners of the project. The project actually started in 2015 when the first part of the today 18 hectares was bought. And Ca Apollonio is now what is hospitality related in this estate near Bassano del Grappa in Veneto region. We offer, gastronomically speaking, a more casual situation and a more classic restaurant, both under the management of the executive chef, Alessio Lunghi. The restaurants are inside the boutique hotel, and around all of that, almost in a Bordeaux chateau style, there are vineyards, a separate winery, 1 hectare of organic farm, then fruit tree, gardens, and a bio lake. And all of that is under the management of Cada Romano, that is the agricultural business of the estate run by the same ownership.
Got it. So would you, because you mentioned, if I didn't misunderstood, that Ca Apollonio is the hospitality project of Cada Roman, basically, right?
Exactly.
So in the past years, we've been learning more about, and we've been hearing a lot more about enoturism. So is this a trend that you intend to hop on?
Yes, definitely. But I also strongly believe that we have built something that has so much to offer in terms of the numbers of experiences you can make in Ca Apollonio world. So we are trying to change the offer, meeting the demand where the demand feels the lack of something different. For me, every guest, every night is something like an enotourist in one way or the other. ringing the bell of Ca Apollonio or Ca Romano should mean that you are ready to be amazed by the project. And then it's our job to understand what depth you're willing to know us. This is how I intend the role of hospitality in enoturism today in general. And I would say we're not so much working to hop on something predefined, but rather to being so interesting that enoturism in the state transform itself in an experience. So that for me is the final goal and the only one I can actively pursue in the restaurant every night.
So you believe a lot in customization. It's somewhat the customer that leads the demand and the offer in a way, and then you adapt and pitch the right thing. I think this is where people or like the Oreca, the entree professionals should be moving forward to, because if you just focus on your offer and like what you have, it's not as efficient, I would say, as creating the perfect experience for each and every single person. So, focusing a little more on Cadaroman, if I may, it's 8 hectares, you said.
It's in reality 18 hectares. So all the estate is in some way related to the wine producing and farm activities that we take on. The 7 hectares are the hectares dedicated to the viticulture. So we have 7 hectares of vineyards, and then with the farm and the gardens and the bio lake, we complete our offer as a farming business.
Got it. So, would you say, now moving to the interesting part, does this biodiversity contribute also to your PV viticultural system? Like, is this decision connected also to this one? Because maybe I don't know if you've already mentioned this, but your viticulture is only PV.
I think yes, definitely. But I think that everything return in two words fundamental for us that are real sustainability. So vines and the farm and gardens are all under the same vision that is real sustainability. And I think while being sustainable is something that every contemporary business aims in a way or in another. Being authentically all round oriented to that achievement is something that need a lot of effort, a lot of planning, and also the ability to think outside the box. So the restaurant, for example, are between the first goals given by Chair, Cares Ethical Restaurant. Then the 7 hectares of vineyard are 100% occupied with PV varieties. To mention the winery itself, together with other wineries, all under the oenological consulting of Nicola Biasi, our winemaker, commissioned a third-party study on the impact of PV production to put a real milestone on the long path to real sustainability. So everything is linked together by these two words, real sustainability, and the vision of the entire project is trying to be accountable for the promises about sustainability.
So, actually, I was thinking, let's do a step back because this is extremely important because you're talking real sustainability and accountability. For those who may not be familiar with the concept of PV, why is PV connected to real sustainability? What is PV?
So the name PIWI comes from a German word that is Pilzwiderstandsfähige, and it means grape varieties that are resistant to oidium and peronospora, powdery and downy mildew. So that's the definition. This resistance is the most relevant element for real sustainability. And these resistances come from the crossing operation that PVs undergo. Essentially, European varieties of Vitis vinifera are crossed with mostly American species. And the goal is to reach the best possible balance between natural resistance to fungi and enological quality. The resistance is brought by the America DNA, and the winemaking quality is obtained from preserving the most part of European DNA in this crossing. And these are essentially PV. It's nothing more and nothing less than across varieties that allow us to be more sustainable in a way that we don't need to spray so much as with the traditional varieties, and together having some vines that allow us to make a high quality wine production.
So, why would you, like, why did you, or why would somebody consider, for example, focusing on PV instead of just organic or biodynamic in a land such as Veneto?
It's funny because PV something that have existed for 150 years, something like that. At the end of the 19th century, hybrids and American vines were one of the few solutions found to fight oidium and peronospora. In our time, we simply understood that what was something essential for the European tradition in 1800s now could mean less spray on vineyards and more sustainable way. And starting from that, breeders and winemakers started to think how these vines can be grown and how the grapes can be used to have in the glass their best expression possible. In Northeast Italy, we have little experience with these varieties, 10 years more or less. Now we are starting to understand properly the vintage variation and the terroir translation through these varieties. But I spoke about Northeast Italy because the free region of Veneto, Trentino Alto Adige, and Friuli Venezia Giulia are, without any doubt, three of the most difficult regions for the spray and protection management in the vineyards. Humid conditions and today climate led in some areas to a number of treatments that are simply not sustainable. Given the fact that it's not only the quantity and the quality of a phytosanitary treatment to be considered, but also the water consumption for every treatment, the CO2 emission of tractors, and the fuel consumption. Soil compaction is another element to be considered. So the risk to spoil and damage the living biodiversity in the vineyards are a threat. And with PV, we don't reach the zero, but we can work within an organic farm with a minus 80% of this type of operation on the fields. So the number of the time we exit with tractors on the fields. I often remember some very instructive numbers. In 2020, the 3% of the agricultural area in Europe was dedicated to the vine, but viticultures consume 65% of the total amount of fungicides. That equals to 68,000 tons per year. And Veneto is an high volume producer, speaking about grapes and wines. And with the previous ratio in mind, surely we can be at least a possible idea to test how good PVs are in translating our wonderful land in a glass and how far can we go with these varieties.
In terms of aromaticity and translation of the terroir in the glass, what are some of the PV labels you've introduced? Because, like as we mentioned at the beginning, there's the Ca Romano project that is the winery, and then there's Ca Apollonio that is the restaurant, the gourmet experience. Of course, you have included PV labels in the wine list. How did you build actually the entire wine list? Does it revolve around the PV selection? Is it more of a complete people pleaser in a way wine list? Like, how did you create that one?
I think both. PV collected in a specific session of the wine list of Ca Apollonio. And obviously, other producers than Ca Romano are represented. For us, the main point of the selection is offering the highest quality possible for every style and every category of wine. We built our wine list together with Andres Oner, thinking about a coherent expression of the Ca Apollonio vision and mission. So in our wine list, you can find wine from all over the world. Most of them not from PV varieties. PVs count for 8-10% of the total. And the wine list put particular attention to Italy and France. But the point is that regardless of what you pick from it, you will find the best balance possible at that time and obviously for our interpretation between quality and attention to the future of viticulture. That means that we are updating constantly the list, and we are always looking for the best expression of the culture of sustainability. It means that PV, organic, biodynamic, etc. are all philosophy, are all protocols that we look with particular attention, but these labels are not essential for us to find something interesting to put in our wine list. Important for us is to give everyone the opportunity to be in our wine list, regardless if there is an organic or a biodynamic or a PV label on the bottle. So there are many producers that are, for example, too small to think about an organic certification. But if we know them and if the wine correctly made, for us is a lot better to tell our guests about this type of wine because we strongly believe that altogether we can go for a real culture of sustainability.
You mentioned that you want to make sure that there's an offer for each type of palate, each type of preference, sustainable, organic, biodynamic, PV. But what I would like to ask you is I've recently discovered that the Michelin Guide included your restaurant in his list. And the interesting thing is that in their website, among the facilities and services of Ca Apollonio, they highlighted an interesting wine list. I want to do a big shout out to you because this is something huge. But also, my question is what do you think caught the attention of such an important organization?
I generally think that the point of difference between one list and another is the way you use it during the service. What I mean is that we can find some wine list with decades of history and decades of work of great professionals behind it. We are not interested in Capolon in copying that sort of wine list. We started 2 years ago and we are trying to work on our specific path. And communication plays in this frame, I think, an essential role in achieving what we are trying to achieve. The worst thing you can do as sommelier, in my opinion, is looking at your wine list as a catalog. We are not a distributor. We are in the hospitality business. And what that means is that we have a tool. And the goal is not just open the bottle in a nice way and vomiting. I'm sorry for the term, but
No, no, but I agree. I agree. I feel like a lot of people have experienced this, people just showing off their knowledge.
the problem is most of the time these information are the ones a guest can find simply rotating the bottle. So our specific goal is to bring our vision at every table through bottles and glasses. And I think that simply we reached at least partially the goal with Michelin critics. So I genuinely hope that the service in Capolonio is able to tell our specific story with the tool of the wine list. Our job as sommelier is to be able to give the motivation to all the staff members to improve and master the communication skill night after night and being an example of that. And I think that is what we are presenting to the gastronomical critics and in this case, Michelin critics.
Talking about communication skills, I have a hot question for you. How do you actually explain and communicate PV to your customer? Like, do you think there's still a little bit of misunderstanding between organic, biodynamic PV? Are people open to trying PV wines? Like, what is the feedback? How do you communicate PV and how is the feedback of the clients?
So luckily we find mostly open-minded and curious guests. A lot of guests are more than happy to try something different. A precise trend in this time is that people drink less. So for us, it's essential to work with the wine by the glass. Through that, we can make try our guests something new in an easier way. Obviously, there are some personal preferences that PV cannot at this time satisfy. That is the elephant in the room that we have to address. There are some regions, for example, the majority, in fact, in which PVs are not yet allowed. And there are some style that PVs now are not able to replicate. One for all, the fuller style of red wines. We don't have any PIWI wine that can be an alternative for this style of wine. But the quality of wine is increasing harvest after harvest, and I'm sure that the wines now are cleaner, more complex, and above all, more able to mirror the terroir in the glass. So, what we are trying to do is to communicate that. So, the variety is always a tool, and what's most important is the quality price ratio, and the ability to get some viticultural area in a glass. But I think that there is definitely a problem of communication and some confusion about organic, biodynamic, and PV. Again, the variety itself is a tool, nothing more. There is an essential cultural value in some varieties, and no one can simply cancel that. So I'm thinking about Nebbiolo, I'm thinking about Sangiovese, I'm thinking about Pinot Noir. In general, looking to the history of viticulture, we have to register that the variety of grapes is always been something in some way secondary to the terroir, especially in Europe. So we starting naming the wine from the place it comes from very long time ago. So that, in my opinion, is the type of explanation we should give when the tool is confused with the production protocols and philosophy. Being oriented to an organic or biodynamic viticulture is something that eventually can be facilitated from the chosen variety, but the two elements have to be considered separately. In Cala Roman, for example, we are organic from day one. But first of all, we are PV producer because that's the tool we choose to interpret our land. So that's the main difference between the philosophy production or protocols and the variety. And the two elements have to be always separated. Otherwise, it's just confusion between two different elements.
That's something that is extremely important to stress. Also, because now going back to the profile and the availability of wines, meaning that, like, for example, you mentioned there are not currently full bodied red wines, or like in some regions, PV is not a thing yet, maybe in the future, but not yet. But maybe it's me being naive, but I do see a lot of opportunity for PV because, for example, okay, there's no full bodied red wines, but at the same time, we're now experiencing a rise of white wines, for example, in general. Or, for example, younger generations do not prefer fully bodied, heavier bodied wines. So do you think that maybe new generations, or like people that are interested in white wines, should be open to consider PV? Do you think that PV can satisfy this type of demand?
Absolutely. Yes. The answer is yes. It's a simple answer, but is what we are trying to communicate night after night. And that's exactly what PV is nowadays about. We have the possibility to use a different tool to bring something new on the table, and working with the quality, we can have some serious alternatives for this type of wine. I always remember that 10 years ago, PV wines were not so satisfying as they are nowadays. They were definitely intense at the nose, but not so complex. And the major problem was that the mouthfeel was weak. So the final was short and the mouth was weak. And that was the problem with the first experiments with PV varieties. Now we have discovered new way to put the PV in a glass. I'm talking about winemaking technique, and this is a game changer, I think. So now we have the ability to suggest an alternative. This element was missing 5, 10 years ago. Now we have, and we can really understand what are the younger generation needs and put PV to work with these intentions. Because wine is not the first choice for beverage for the younger people, but there is definitely some more profound, some more deep interest in sustainability and in the ecological way of our life. So PV could be one of the way with which we can restart some interest in this type of drink.
So, one last question. How do you see beef evolving in the next year? Or is there something that you would say to producers that are considering starting or are willing to learn a little bit more, or maybe like professionals in restaurants? Like, do you have any suggestions? It's a very wide question, but it's up to you. Feel free to share any thoughts.
As I noted earlier, we have little experience with PV today. If we think to the most successful appellation in our wine regions, 10 years of experience, basically nothing. Just to give you a practical example, our winemaker Nicola Biasi has done little more than 10 harvests, and he is one of the point of reference of the Pinot winemaking worldwide. He has done an incredible job interpreting and adapting the classic enology to PVs. And yet, every year is the occasion to try something new. So I think that the coming years, quality through experience will be the polar star for every serious TV producer. But together with that, I don't think that in a 5-10 years period, the demand for PV wines will explode. And that's because the large part of the consumer is not used to them. So thinking about what we have already said, the vast majority wine consumer are older, and the ability to change some paradigms is difficult to obtain. But I strongly believe that recalling the role of professional in hospitality and wine service, there will be a stronger and stronger demand for wines of terroir made with specific attention to the sustainability. I think that PVs will not be demanded per se. I think that PV has a world of possibilities in front of them, and we need to give them the ability to express what are their potentials and what are their values for the real sustainability. That I think is the way we should think about PV in the next years. It's more something that we can do as communicators rather than what winemakers should do with PVs. PVs has to keep in mind that the quality is always the way to go for the production. Our role is fundamental, I think, now for the development of this type of innovation. That is an innovation that started 150 years ago. So it's a well established innovation that has in the latest year some new, fresh ideas and possibilities. That's what I think about the future of PVs.
I think this is a wrap, but I really want to thank you. I think this interview has been extremely helpful for me, but also to listeners in order to understand better PV, what it is about, what are the challenges, of course, because you've touched on that too. You've been extremely honest about current situation. I think this was a really interesting talk to have and needed one too, because if you look up BV information on the internet, there's not as many information as for wine in general. So that was also very interesting too. But now I've just learned that it's something extremely recent. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm very much looking forward to what's coming up next.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Let us know your thoughts on our social media at Italian Wine Podcast and follow us to keep up with the next generation of Italian wine people. Cheers!